Inherently in life, being happy and feeling pleasure are not the same. And if you confuse them, you can end up chasing the wrong one and sacrificing the other, right? Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secret Podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I don't know, maybe you're sick of hearing me talk about this, but I went on a silent retreat. Dun, dun, dun. It's like I went to camp for the summer. But I went on the silent retreat. I am 43 years old. I've never been on a silent retreat in my life. As you can probably tell, because you listen to me talk all the time, I talk a lot. And when I'm not talking, I'm pretty much listening to other people talk to me in my role as a coach, therapist, etc. So, went on a silent retreat, was kind of weird and nervous about it, but it was really, really powerful. And it was something that I wish I would have done earlier. I've never had 3.5 days of quiet in my life, really, since ever. So this was really incredibly informative and incredibly insightful. It really allowed me to have the space in my head to figure out things, think about things, and just relax internally in a way that I never had before. One of the things I did a lot of is I brought a lot of books. This silent retreat allowed you to read. I love reading, always have. My little boy Kai really, really likes it too. We sort of share that together. I read 3 books in 3 days, which is kind of cool. The Art of Happiness is one of the books that I read, and it's a book written together by the Dalai Lama and Howard Cutler, who's a psychiatrist. And, you know, it's called The Art of Happiness because one of the main things that the Dalai Lama talks about in the book is it's just how our goal in life is the pursuit of happiness. And that sounds really, really simple, but as you all probably know, because you all also want to be happier in your daily life, it can get complicated sometimes. Now, I'm pretty sure I will be sharing a lot about the book, The Art of Happiness, as we talk over these next months. But I want to focus on a specific aspect, and that is this part of the conversation where the Dalai Lama, in talking to Dr. Cutler, mentions that people often confuse happiness and pleasure. And as somebody who works in the addiction field, this really, really resonated for me because I think a lot of times people in general in life confuse them, but certainly in my own work in addiction and in my own life, previously struggling with addiction, there was a lot of confusion between pleasure and happiness. And so I'm going to split this up into a few different topics, but the first one is just separating the two, just understanding pleasure versus happiness, right? Pleasure is the feeling you get of just your whole body tingling and feeling good, right? That you feel it when I'm even talking about, right? Pleasure, like sexual pleasure, when you eat and you have pleasure from the food that you eat. That's pleasure, right? The visceral experience of feeling really, really good. That's different than feeling happy or content. Now, in neuroscience, for years and years and years, people actually didn't know to separate them, to be perfectly honest. So still in the addiction field, sometimes you'll hear people talk about dopamine being the pleasure neurotransmitter. It's one of those things that really still makes the rounds big time in the addiction world, but it's not true. People used to talk about dopamine as the pleasure neurotransmitter for years, but dopamine is more the reward or good kind of neurotransmitter, not necessarily pleasure. The thing is that they go along so often together. When you do things that are good for you, sometimes they bring you pleasure, so we feel them together. Like when somebody uses heroin, it feels rewarding, it feels like a good thing, and it provides pleasure. But the pleasure seems to be actually created by different neurotransmitters, primarily the opioids, the opiate receptors. And here's how I know that they are separate, right? When people first reach out for drugs, they might provide both, some good, positive reinforcement and pleasure. But over time, what you find is there can be a separation of the two where you get less pleasure from the drug, and yet the rewarding quality, the feeling that is providing you something good, increases, but it's this fake feeling that happens a lot of times, right? And so we know that in the brain, pleasure and happiness are separated. Now, happiness is not only a dopamine thing. It's a state of being. Serotonin has something to do with you feeling happy biologically, etc. But inherently in life, being happy and feeling pleasure are not the same. And if you confuse them, you can end up chasing the wrong one and sacrificing the other, right? So sometimes you will go for immediate pleasure and forgo or lose some overall life happiness in the process. And that gets me to the second point, which is when we talk about pleasure versus happiness, we also talk about short-term versus long-term gain. Now, we know that people are not always the best at calculating long-term gain. And it makes sense. If I do something, if I ingest something or I struggle with something right now, I feel the pain immediately, or I feel the pleasure or the happiness, the contentment, the reward right now, right? Like if I give you $1 right now, you get the reward immediately. If I tell you, hey, I'll give you $1 in 3 years, doesn't really mean all that much. And there's a lot of research in the field of psychology looking at that curve, sort of how much money in the future, how much reward in the future would be equal to how much money now, right? And literally the way this works is, hey, if I gave you $10 now, would you take it versus $10 in 3 years? And almost everybody will say, yes, of course, I'll take the $10 now. And then you go, okay, what if I gave you $10 now or $100 in 3 years? Most people might still take the $100 in 3 years. And then you keep working that up, and eventually maybe you get to, what if I give you $10 now or $500 in 3 years? And at some point, most people will go, no, I'll wait. And that difference, the ratio between those two things, can be considered the long-term discount, right? Like how much money do you need in the future to make it equal a certain amount of current reward? But that plays out everywhere in your life. Every day in your life, your brain is constantly making calculations between, should I take the short-term benefit? Like, I really want to sleep, but I have a really big project at work. Should I just sleep in and not really care about the project, short-term reward? Or should I just get my ass up, go do what I need to do for the long-term gain of the money, promotion, accolades, all that other stuff that I'll get? So a lot of us don't think actively about this, but pleasure versus happiness is not the only piece you got to care about. You also have to care about, is this pleasure or happiness now or long-term? Again, I'll talk about drug use, right? A lot of times, especially if you talk about school and kids who start using drugs around 14, 15, 16, 18 years old, that is part of the calculation. Literally sometimes, how many of you have had this experience? Like, do I want to go out with my friends drinking tonight and get wasted? Immediate momentary pleasure. Or do I want to go sleep now? No immediate momentary pleasure, but then I'll be able to do better on my test tomorrow, which will give me a better grade in the class and get me to a bigger university, right? That difference is short versus long-term gain, and that's a calculation you have to make as well. And now I'm going to complicate it with one more level. Because pleasure versus happiness ignores the fact that part of achieving happiness is actually removing the things in your life that cause pain. We've talked about that a lot here. But pleasure is sometimes the removal of pain, right? Sometimes the numbing of current pain, removing that from your life, is like the short-term gain of pleasure. It's called negative reinforcement in neuroscience. And the idea is, I am feeling bad now. I can do something to take away the bad in the moment, get really drunk, shoot some heroin, smoke some meth, whatever, right? Have sex, whatever the thing is. And then I'll eliminate the pain, which will be the equivalent of getting pleasure right now. A lot of people that I meet, this is where the downfall ends up happening. They experience pretty regular pain in their life, and the immediate removal of that pain, short-term gain, overrides the calculation of, hey, you know what? My boyfriend just beat me up, or my girlfriend and I just got in a fight, or whatever it is that caused pain in the moment. I need to do the hard long-term work of getting out of this relationship, or fixing these elements of my life that are not going well, leaving my family behind, whatever that is for you, leaving my job. I have to do the hard work right now to get the long-term gain, is the balance. And oftentimes, because we don't think about these things explicitly, the pleasure or removal of pain in the short term just seems like a much, much better option than the long-term work that has to be done. And so There are a lot of tools and a lot of techniques to make this work easier, right? To make it easier for people to do the hard work. But this is one of the big things that I found that can really, really help in reducing the bias towards let me do whatever feels good in the moment and sacrifice the long-term success. One of the things that I found that works is from that exercise on how much money in the future will help you to avoid taking the $10 now. You have to make the future reward big. You've got to make it something you really, really want. I mean, think about it this way. If I have a shitty life and I'm thinking to myself, if I want to get blackout drunk tonight, and the option is, should I get blackout drunk tonight and then fight with my wife about it tomorrow? Or should I not get blackout drunk tonight, fight with my wife today and tomorrow, and have a really shitty day tomorrow where I have to fight not blacking out again? It's pretty obvious why I'm going to take the shorter term gain. Me not blacking out today has no win. There's no brighter future on the other side. The long-term gain is not better than the short-term gain. So that's the equivalent of somebody saying, hey, should I give you $10 today or $10 next week? Everybody takes the $10 today. So here's the big task for you. You have to do some of that job. You have to set in your head the big reward that stands far away so that your brain, when it makes a calculation of do I want to act in a certain way for pleasure right now, or do I want to get the long-term gain in the future, it has a much easier decision. Imagine for a moment if you were able to play this game with yourself in your head, and the question was this: do you want the $10 now, or do you want $5 million in a year? Pretty much everybody listening right now would take the $5 million in a year. You almost don't care what you've got to do for the rest of the year. You're just going to hold off until you get that money. That's where we're trying to get in life, right? We're trying to get to the place where the long-term gain doesn't actually seem like a sacrifice because the gain difference is so big, it completely overrides any pain, discomfort, or work that we've got to do in the meantime. If you can get really, really good at teaching yourself how to play this trick on your own psyche as you move on, my guess is you will get to a place where you almost eliminate the question about taking short-term gain because there will always be a bigger picture for you to look at. I hope that exercise is useful for you. I know it's been in my life. And if it was, I would love for you to, first of all, leave a comment or something along those lines, but tag me at Dr. D. Jaffe at ignited.me. Let me know what lesson came out of it for you and how you're going to apply it. I would love to hear that. Have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.